Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I am your host, Steve E.47. I'm an author and mental health counselor. Are you curious about therapy? Do you feel there is a lot of mystery about therapy? Do you wonder what your therapist is doing and why? The goal of this podcast is to make therapy and psychology accessible to all by using real language and straight-to-the-point discussions. This podcast wants to remind you to take care of your mental health, just like you would your physical health. Therapy should not be intimidating. It should be a great way to better health. I will demystify what happens in counseling, discuss topics related to mental health, and discussions you can have with your therapist. I also want to introduce psychology in everyday life, as I feel most of our lives are enmeshed in psychology. I want to introduce the subtle and not so subtle ways psychology plays a factor in our lives. It will be my own mix of thoughts as well as special guests. So join me on this discovery of therapy and psychology. Hi, and welcome to episode 47 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I am Steve B. So if you haven't listened to episode 46 yet, I urge you to do so. Gina Mofo is a great guest. We had a great conversation about a slew of different subjects, including therapy, mental health, and trauma, and things of that nature. So I hope you go back and listen to it. But for episode 47, we are going to talk to Jenn Nakhai. Jenn is a colleague of mine. She is the founder of Aon Counseling in Massachusetts, and she has been someone I met through another agency I worked for a few years, and we stayed in touch, and we really got much more in touch in the last few months. And we thought that we would have not only one episode, but two episodes, because there's so many things to talk about, especially around the COVID, how it affects people, how it affects us mentally, and how we've changed how we think because of the pandemic. So here's the interview. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. This is a first on so many levels. This is going to be the first one that I'm actually going to put on YouTube. You guys can go and see it if you want to, number one. Number two, maybe I shouldn't say it first. This is the last time I'm going to use this computer to do this interview. I'm going to be getting some new equipment for my next season, so that's really amazing. And I can't tell you how excited I am to be here with Jenn. Jenn Nakhai is someone that it's interesting because she remembers me from an agency I worked for online a couple of years ago. And she said how helpful I was. And maybe because of how the agency or the company worked, I know I had to be supportive to other people, but I didn't realize that we met there. And we reconnected we were connected on Instagram, but we were really reconnected about, I don't know, a year ago or so. And I can't tell you how much we've connected so much on different levels. She's an amazing woman, and she's going to talk about herself, but we're really going to concentrate on talking about the effects of COVID and pandemic and isolation and what it's done to our community. And she is so amazing. I already know she's going to be amazing. It's going to be a 2-part podcast. So no pressure, Jenn. Jenn Nakhai, welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy.
Thank you, Steve. Hi. Thank you for having me.
I meant every word I say. And as I told you right before we got online, not that I don't want to be connected with everyone, but in our particular case, I'm so happy, and I hope we never lose that connection because I really enjoyed it.
I got your back, Steve. Don't worry. You're good.
I know you. We've met for coffee a couple of times. We've talked a few other times, but maybe my audience doesn't know who you are. So maybe you can introduce yourself.
All right. Well, I am a therapist. I'm an LICSW to be specific. I practice in Massachusetts, and I'm the owner or founder of Aon Counseling and Consulting. And we provide psychotherapy to individuals, couples, and families and kids. And so here we go. And I've been doing a podcast for a while. And then we noticed that we were each other doing podcasts. And then we wanted to do podcasts together. So it makes sense. And thank you for being my teacher in the beginning of when we learned how to do teletherapy before it was necessary.
Yep.
Remember that time?
Yeah. That's called ancient times for some people. And I remember the conversations I had 7-8 years ago with people who would tell me, teletherapy won't work. It's not, it's this, it's that. And people would even say that I'm unethical and call me names. And that's not even a joke. And a couple of years ago, I went, how do you like me now?
Oh, I mean, you have to get canceled at least by Wednesday every week, or else what are you even doing? That's fine.
And that's why I think we get along fine, because I think that me and you pissing off people is not exactly something that bothers us really. So
God forbid. What are you going to do? Okay. Hey, feedback is a breakfast of champions. A therapist knows how to give feedback. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for others, I'm not sure. Either way, it's going to be a good time. Let's talk about the pandy, though.
let's talk about the pandemic.
How
I
are
mean,
you? How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, and I'm doing better than I was about a month ago. And we're recording this in April, but will be out sometime in the beginning of May. So there's a little delay, but there's not that much of a delay. I took a week off about a month ago because I just had it. And what I mean by that is I was sitting in sessions with clients, and not that you want to quantify what's worse or what's better, but things that used to not bother me bothered me. And, I decided I needed to take care of myself, which was the first time probably since the pandemic started. It was hard for me to admit that I needed the help. It was hard for me to say that I'm a human and I'm allowed to have this thought because, I'm a therapist and people count on me. And it's been better since. I'm putting some changes in my life. Some of the changes I don't want to talk quite right now on a mic and on a video quite yet, but you may know a couple, Jen, but most people don't know yet. They're coming, but I need to change things so that I can connect with people instead of just kind of being a therapy robot. And so I'm doing much better, making some changes in my life because the weight of being there for people was so devastating, in the sense that I wanted to be there for others, but I was just not there for myself and my family and everything else. So I've changed a lot of my life in the last few weeks, and hopefully it'll continue that way. But thank you for asking.
I mean, we have to ask at this point because I feel like the last 2, 3 years have been so intense for everyone that it's just like, if it's not an absolutely necessary conversation that needs to happen, and like if we're connecting now after all of this has happened, then that means that you matter more as a connection to me personally. Just because, now it's a matter of like life or death. To see people and to connect with people becomes a situation of like, are people good enough for this? Is this a person who's going to put me in danger? Like there's risks in having friends now. That's social distancing, I guess, in the long run.
Well, I'll reciprocate the question to you. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing better than last week and the week before that, mainly because I've been able to have a lot of communication and not been isolated. My support team was there for me, that has been there this whole time. And I think I was able to talk things through with people. There was like clear boundaries being set. Amen.
Yeah.
And those are respected and valued, that it makes you feel valuable. So feeling good, rearranging my living situation, moved in with my partner. It's different. It's a totally different
Yeah.
space. Family means something different. Support means something different, especially after the pandemic. So, and I started the pandemic like solo, just me and the dog. You know? So now it's different and it's harder, but the load is easier to bear because there's more people
Right.
for me. I also know during the pandemic, a lot of people were overloaded with people at the same time, and that put them not just at risk, but mentally at risk.
Well, I think that that's what, first of all, you contacting me when you were having some trouble, and thank you for that. I like to be part of your support system. So
Mm.
don't forget about that. But I think that's, just processing our feelings when we're me and the dog, or I had my two cats, I had my two kids, but it's not exactly where I'm going to sit with my kids and say, let's process our emotions for the last 2 years. I think that people have really struggled with that. Did you find that that happened with you, or do you feel like people were kind of like open to that? Or were you like me? I won't project anything. I'll say like me. I can handle this. I have this. I can handle this. I have this, even though I had my own struggles.
No, no, Steve. I definitely had 4 mental breakdowns before the 90 days of pandemic. Okay, you could quantify, like you could see a progression of what happened as things kept breaking down in society. But then that got better because then I had to reprioritize the support team, really take inventory who matters, who is going to always matter, who is going to always be there, who do I always want to be there for, who is in a position of being way younger than the rest of us, kind of knowing how to navigate this, who needs actually guidance.
Right.
In the same way that I had it when I was, 19 to 21. Awkward age where if you're not pivoting until you find something quickly, then it's a lot of lost time in between. There's a lot of lost time right now in learning, in intimacy, in interacting.
Right.
I think we've actually regressed in how we interact. We've moved backwards.
Well, I think the regression is, for lack of a better word, normal. I don't know if that's the right word, because we were pretty much isolated for a whole year. And people, like, I feel like unchecked thoughts occurred. When you go to the office and you say something like, little, whatever you want to call it, we'll call it a little crazy. You had someone to go, hey, Steve, how about you chill a little bit? Well, I was alone. I was at home, and all my thoughts were unchecked. It was my own stuff, and I just went away and ran it. Did you find that that's probably part of it, or at least part of what even is going on to this day after the pandemic? Because I don't think people know how to interact with individuals anymore.
I never thought about it like that, actually, because I tried to stay as connected as I could through social media, had regular Zoom parties, if you will, as much as I possibly could, attended group fitness classes online, even that included meditations that helped me feel very, very connected to the greater cause and what we're trying to achieve here together. But I mean, I think we were terrible before, and then if you don't use it, you lose it.
Yes.
so that may have happened to us, to all of us. And I know that it's made my communication more honest, maybe even to the point of being even more aggressive.
And that's what I kind of noticed with a lot of people. It's gotten like a lot more aggressive.
Yeah.
And I think that some of us are maybe tired, some of us are not. But I think that when I think about unchecked thoughts and what the pandemic has brought us is, if someone discorded us online because we're not interacting face to face, well, we can cancel them. We can hang up on them. Now you go back in the community, you can't just go and hurt people, although I'm looking at what's happening this spring and it's kind of happening. But that's part of the unchecked thoughts that I think we may have missed.
It is possible now that I think, now in remembering the trauma,
Yes.
if you see that part is fragmented already. And my ADHDs are on the highest levels since the pandemic. I haven't been able to focus in the same way. I have more creative thoughts, sure, but not the same like productivity focus. Not that things have to be about productivity at the end of the day, but the ADHD is everywhere. Okay. I feel very, I don't know if the word is feeling very fragmented, but I'm thinking in a very fragmented way. I
Right.
know it's harder to keep certain appointments, to remember certain dates of certain things that I have to do. And as always with trauma, even if it's like soft, passive trauma, like, no, you're not in the midst of the middle of the bombing of the war, but we're in the same globe as all these wars that are happening. So it's just like, yeah, there's trauma going on collectively too. Worse. But I know that in my body, anger had certainly built up. And that's when my acupuncturist had recommended I try boxing, actually. She said something about storing tension in your shoulders. And then I boxed so hard that I broke my shoulder. Oops. But we're back now, thanks to the great people of the physical therapy spot. We're back.
That's good.
But it was part of that aggression building up, at least what I noticed in my body, that changed a lot during the pandemic. included movement and getting aggression out. Where is all this anger coming from? I don't know.
That's an interesting question, though. Thing that when we think about emotions, it's like anger comes from fear sometimes. And I think that the fear played a huge factor. I could be wrong. It's just my own meandering thoughts. And since it's my podcast, I do whatever the hell I want. But, I think that one of the things that we underestimated through the pandemic is the fear part.
It's terrifying.
Well, yeah. And that's what I think we forgot, because one of my kind of like learning things during the pandemic is that we need to acknowledge fear more often, because that's what leads to aggression, anger, sadness, disgust, and judgment. And not being able to acknowledge the fear, we go to the default, what's comfortable. If I can say fuck you to you, that's a lot easier than saying, you know what, Jen, I'm a little fearful right now and I don't know what to do. And for me, when you say anger, I hear fear, not from you, but just a general stance from people.
Advanced therapy. I owe you $300. Thank you. Oh my goodness. Yo, that was good. Oh my goodness. Woo.
Yeah, don't fall on your chair. This is the first video. Can't have my guests fall.
Anyway, yeah, it was definitely a lot of fear. And I know that one of the main points that we wanted to touch upon is that all or nothing, us versus them mentality. And that, yeah, it is very much based in fear, giving up control, right, being controlled by who, what, when. Do we even know at this point? Media portrayals, stuff like that.
Right. And do you perceive that you lost control during the pandemic? Do you feel that you had more control over yourself? A little bit of both? What did you see in that? Because I think that led to a lot of us versus them stuff.
Oh, good question. I'm not sure.
That's why they pay me the big bucks.
This is, oye, you're going to have to send me an invoice. I'm not sure.
But no, think about it a little bit. I'm just going to, say we're listening to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I'm with Jen. My name is Steve. And I think that it's like something that a lot of people are feeling. And as much as you feel that I'm kind of like, I'm going to invoice you after this, I also think that it's a good discussion to have, because there's a lot of this stuff that happened. I include myself, by the way, in what I just said. Mm-hmm. And I think that, is it the control or the loss of control that played a factor? I don't know.
It's great because I feel like I had more control over certain things, especially at work, and yet way more like emotional dysregulation.
Yeah.
Way more. So it was just like, we'll be very restricted over here and super disciplined, and then on the back end, at home, it's a different story. But then I found balance through working on my body a lot. It was the only way of connecting, the spirit to the body. So it was like, all right, either we do this now or not. Is the world ending or not? What's going on?
Right. Mm-hmm. And how do we connect our spirit and our body? Because I certainly am a mind, body, spirit type of person. I believe in that firmly. But how do we do it when we're so dysregulated?
Pues some of the yoga principles talk about breath being that connection, essentially.
Right.
When you kind of take the time to breathe into a movement, that's why you were able to go further. You can focus better. I can lift more depending on my breath. Literally, in actual fitness. I'm not even kidding. I've been deadlifting this week. So this is what I'm thinking about. Even the practical purposes behind strength training, for example, being able to carry a person to safety, or having to run a certain amount of space for your safety, stuff like that. I mean, I've definitely entered reptilian brain zone during the pandemic, and hopefully did it responsibly. Hopefully didn't hurt anyone in the process. Hopefully, I feel like I've stayed pretty safe, pretty regularly isolated, if not here in my hometown. Like, I've been traveling just home.
And home is?
Puerto Rico.
Just in case people don't know.
That's right.
Because Montreal is my home, but we all have different places we call home.
Have you been home since the pandy?
I was there for my uncle passed away last October, and I was there for that. And then I went up for Christmas. I haven't had a chance to go back since, but part of my spiritual collapse, for lack of a better word, again, if you're listening to this for preciousness of words, you've got the wrong podcast. Go listen to someone who really thinks that's important. But my collapse had a lot to do with being away. My uncle passed away, had family members with sickness, and currently have a friend of mine who's going through his own issues, the big C. And kind of like being Puerto Rico, several, like, it's like 8, 9, 1,000 miles away. I'm like 300 miles away from Montreal, yet there was this imaginary line we created as humans that I couldn't cross because, they wouldn't let people into Canada because of COVID. So sometimes that imaginary line felt extremely heavy for me. And I'm an only child. My dad passed away about 6 years ago. So you're not there for your mom. You're not there for your family. You're not there for your friends. And you kind of like panic because I love it here. Don't get me wrong. I became an American citizen last year. Very happy to be here. But as I joke around, is that this is still my second home. It's a home, but it's my second home.
Right.
And losing that connection, that ability to go there, just get in the car and be there in 6 hours is, 5 if you drive like I do. But yeah, no, I'm just confessing stuff.
Driving, Steve. Why?
If you get pulled over, I'm sorry. I'm new to this country, Mr. Officer.
Wow. Did you hear that, Gene? in the office over there?
That's
perimeter security. Gene, take notes, FBI.
Don't worry. I think I've said it to many people, including people in law enforcement. No, and most people laugh, so it's kind of good. But yeah, no, I think that was something that was really hard for me. And that's the stuff that I think people felt that disconnect too. And I'm not sometimes a border, sometimes it's your house. And talking to someone this week, they were saying that their neighbors have literally not left the house still. Like, we're 2+ years removed.
And then there were the people who are actually agoraphobic before the pandemic. And now it's worse. I know I always like being home. To be honest with you, I always like being home in general, but this definitely made it worse and ruined as many friendships and relationships as I could have never thought that this could touch, but I definitely lost respect for a lot of people.
Okay. In what way?
In just seeing kind of like the way that they went about not believing what was going on, not seeing how other people were being affected, how people were dying, just kind of like dismissing the whole problem, like it's fear mongering and that's it. Funny that we're talking about fear mongering and anger coming from fear.
Just saying.
Hey, listen, I miss him. You know who I'm talking about.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. I don't know if I miss him, but
maybe I'm addicted to the chaos and the fear.
Ooh.
Wow.
Now I'm definitely sending you a bill for that one.
Wow. Whoa. Maybe. It's possible. Either way, I thrive in it.
Right. But like people who don't know we've talked obviously, but you've worked in the jail. And your counseling services also help individuals get the legal services they need also, which is very much something that was difficult to get prior to a pandemic. It was extremely hard during a pandemic, and things haven't gotten easier. And so it's a little bit of what we talked about, I think, off air, but when we first got on today, it's hard to understand when we've had our own difficulties. I'm not dismissing anyone's difficulties, but if you don't know where you're going to live, if you don't know if you're going to be able to stay in a country and you might end up going back to a place where they're going to literally chop your head off, not the expression, literally do it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're telling me that you can't get your milk.
They're going to chop slowly. You know what I'm saying?
And I think that's the stuff that I loved working in a jail. I don't know if I liked the doors closing behind me, but I liked part of that. And I certainly liked working in a crisis team for several years. And I love working with individuals coming out like homeless and stuff like that, whether it's from jail or they lost their housing or what have you. And I love that chaos. But part of me, and maybe the pandemic has brought me to like, maybe chaos isn't that great.
Right? Get a little tired there, a little fatigued.
Uh, the compassion fatigue is one thing. I think fatigue period is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, yeah, definitely during the pandemic, I had to rest a lot. I had to learn what was better for me, how much coffee, even if you're not even going to be that active that day, you can have before you start feeling the jitters. I mean, everything was off balance. But then suddenly I found balance through then focusing on food, right? Because then food can counteract all that. And not to get into fitness and nutrition, I had time for fitness and nutrition during the pandemic. I never had that time before.
Right.
And then it's been a struggle to keep up with it afterwards as amazing establishments like Goodnight Fatty right next to me. Amazing place, which, by the way, if you haven't been, they're only open on the weekends. It's that good.
So where's that? On the North Shore of Boston, Massachusetts?
Salem, Mass.
Salem, Mass. All right.
Amazing.
Remember, this is an international podcast. I got to give all that information away.
Salem, Massachusetts. In the North Shore, Mass. Right off of Route 1. Something like that.
But those businesses, the hard part too, is that during the pandemic, some of them were shut down. Some of them justifiably so. Some of them not so justifiably so. And they struggled with that. And I've worked with a lot of business owners too. And the financial burden and the stress was like, wow. Luckily or unluckily, depending on how you perceive it, our job, we didn't have lack of clients wanting to do therapy. In fact,
Right.
we're in crisis since then. We were in crisis before that. Most people didn't know. Now we're in a real crisis of having a shortage of counselors, social workers, and people that treat people for mental health stuff. But I think that the other part of the pandemic and what occurred is like a lot of financial stressors. I mean, how many businesses had to close because of that?
Yeah, that was really sad to see, but also it was one of those make it or break it moments. At least in my business, I had to pivot in a way where we need a patient portal where people can sign paperwork and not have to come here or have to mail it in. And it just, if a mom and pop shop was not able to fill out a lot of paperwork for financial support in the moment, or had their QuickBooks in order in the event that they wanted to move forward with applications for properties, for new properties, for new rentals, even, you're not getting in anywhere if everything was not absolutely up to date with your taxes, even.
Right.
And they definitely kept up with that during the pandemic Lovato.
Yes.
Definitely kept up with that one. And so everyone was expected to keep up as well. And I saw a lot of people who maybe had a business and had a vision, but it was not sustainable from the administrative side, and they lost it. Lost their business, lost their mental health because of it, lost their, legacy that they wanted to leave for their family.
Right.
And then we have actual loss, the people that we lost in the process.
Which really impacted so many people because that was part of the anger that I had sometimes with individuals who told me, well, this is not real.
Right.
I work with people in the hospital / morgue in my job. I'm like,
right.
oh, so like 3 refrigerated trucks with bodies just piling up. That's just made up. It's just a story. It's a storyline. Just they make their point. They're just leaving him there. So for me, a lot of anger came from that because people didn't get that not only do you lose your loved one, you don't see your loved one before they pass away because you're not allowed in the hospital. And when they die, you can't even have proper whatever people do, services, memorials, coming homes, or what have you, because you can't have gatherings. So it's not only the loss of that individual, but that loss of the whole grief mourning process that people couldn't possibly do because we were in a pandemic.
I this is your point about the fear earlier is making it's sinking in now
Mm-hmm.
here in the North Shore waters.
I am in Central Mass, so I get it.
Because I feel like a lot of my anger that came out during the pandemic was specifically about this. Like, I don't want to lose you. I'm scared to literally lose you. Maybe I don't know you that well. Maybe we don't have to be ultra friends, but I'm scared to lose you as another person, as a life, as a human being. That's all we have.
Right.
A lot of it was super dismissed, which made me angry.
Right.
I was told that I was lying, that I'm making up medical information, and yet my first responders, who are my friends, working in emergency rooms in areas like Florida, are telling me how many of their coworkers are dying of COVID.
Right.
And it feels like, well, then I am now definitely going to stay home. Now I'm extra angry, pent up energy. Everyone's like, let's go out to the streets and protest. And I'm like, this might not be the best moment.
Right.
Of all the great times we've had to do that.
And the stuff that got people angry too is that they didn't have all the information, so they didn't know what to do. So when we, that 2-week lockdown that was going to solve everything really changed. And a lot of people have said to me, see, they didn't know what they were doing. I'm like, I don't know. Have you ever heard of COVID-19, whatever the initials are after that, until it occurred? No. Well, then they didn't either. So how the hell were they supposed to know?
Oh, yeah, no, I love how people have come at me like criticizing the medical industry. How come they can't just, like fix the virus because we've had the flu? I'm like, yeah, exactly. We have had many flus and we continue to have flus and they get stronger as we go.
Right.
And then they talk about like, well, they made mistakes and they intubated people in the beginning. Uh-huh.
Right.
It's a new virus. We are learning through trial and error how to treat it. Now, we tried something. It defo didn't work. Oops.
Right.
A bunch of my friends died in that round.
Right.
And that's when I was just like, I don't know what else to do. I don't know what else to do.
I remember connecting with you because we connected on several levels, but at one point you had sent on, I think it was on your Instagram account, a friend of yours who worked, I think, the emergency room or the hospital, who had passed away and didn't know the guy. But the impact it had on you definitely, like, I felt it. And that's why when I hear about, well, we don't know. Well, yeah, people didn't know, period. That's not because they weren't trying. They just didn't know. And this real loss was someone, that was close to you, that you loved, and maybe you haven't talked to a while, but you still love them. And you're not able to even process that thought because other people are like, they're making that up. So it really turns to anger at that point.
With the government, with other people, with neighbors, on Facebook.
Well, Facebook wars are a whole different ballgame.
To name a few places, random places.
Facebook wars and Twitter wars, and like,
they're real. They are.
But that's what I think, we talk about so much anger and fear, is that if someone brought up a point of view that was different, because of our own fears, we turn either to anger or buying into it 100%. I can't remember exactly what the first few weeks someone had put on Instagram. If you gargle with salt water, that'll help you not get COVID, or it's going to help get rid of your COVID. And I'm like, oh my bloody hell, are we making shit up at this point?
Oh, a lot of fake healers out there, particularly in the city of Lynn. Big shout out.
Lynn, Mass.
Lynn, Mass.
City of Sin.
A lot of people talking about, oh, I got these vitamins that I've healed COVID. Oh, really? You healed it? But also saying things like women not drinking the right pH water is going to give them a yeast infection. And it's just like, do you have a license? And then it turns out they don't for anything. So it's just like, oh, okay, no wonder we're making whatever claims we want to make at this point. You cure COVID and everything. Amazing. And yet, Lynn impacted by COVID at a pretty disproportionate rate, mainly people of color dying. Cool. Thank you for doing that disservice.
Right. I mean,
Death.
on the next episode, we'll definitely talk about substance use during COVID and how that affected it. It was always, I'll go back to even 2006, 2005, 2007, when people of color, and I don't want to make it too much of a politics, but just truths, people of color were dying of heroin overdoses at very high rates until it hit the Caucasian population. It wasn't a crisis.
Right.
And to this day, some people still think that it's not a problem. And if I would argue that we haven't had a problem with substances, particularly fentanyl or some sort of opioid derivative, hasn't been this bad in 10 years. And it just got worse with COVID. But most people will tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about. So we'll get to that next episode for sure.
Yeah, these overdoses, because in that mental health emergency that you talked about that was already happening before the pandemic, just the amount of accidental overdoses.
Right. We'll definitely get to that. I got a call yesterday from an individual saying, "You're highly recommended by John Doe." And I'm like, I'm at 150% capacity. I just don't have the capacity to take someone more, because I think that 151 or whatever percent that would make it probably crack me. And it was the first time I kind of said that. And the person says, "I fully understand." And it was such a relief that he understood. And I was able to I gave him like 4 or 5 phone numbers. And he's like, "When people say no, they don't offer phone numbers." And I'm like, "Well, that's weird to me, because I didn't have any openings, but I know people who might." It's the least I can do as a therapist. But I think, therapists were also burnt out. And the substance abuse crisis that we currently have is so misunderstood. And definitely, I want to try to keep that for our next episode. Let's get back to, talking a little more about the other weight of the COVID to this day. And I think that, we're going to have a very heavy summer, in my opinion.
Are you making a fatty joke right now?
Well,
About people getting heavier during COVID because they sat at home and
we could
ate
talk
out?
about that. I was just talking about how the violence escalated, and as the tick of escalation of violence has been very predominant in big cities across the United States. You look at even mass shootings, you look at Chicago, you look at Seattle, you look at our own Boston.
New York, something happened in New York
Right.
last week.
So I think that what I've found too is that what we're going to see after this, we're not post-pandemic quite yet. We're still at the tail end of it. I think that people have not had the ability to manage their emotions. And I think that that's a lot of what is going on right now, in my opinion.
I mean, if your parents didn't teach you originally, how did you learn?
Or if you were so isolated that you had only your own thoughts and your own paranoia, for lack of a better word, not to diagnose anyone, just we get paranoid. We get fearful. So we get paranoid about XYZ. Do we carry that now that there's more people on the street, that you can, quote, leave your house? I think that that's going to play a humongous factor throughout the summer in, I say big cities, but I'm sure that, I can't think of a small city. I'll go with a shout out to where I live for a short while, Morrisville, Vermont. Probably have the same thing, even though it's a rural area. I don't know if you agree or not, but I just feel like it's just escalated because people have been sitting with their own thoughts, and they're just going to, it's going to be us versus them kicking in again.
Because I visited a couple rural areas, for example, in Maine, I have noticed way more aggression in places where normally people are very friendly and it's like vacation land. And it's become a lot more racial than usual, like even in a very overt way. Even as you're driving, seeing crazy flags on people's cars. I mean, the last 2 years of campaigns politically also part of the trauma. Lest we forget what kind of election we just went through.
Right.
What was that?
Well, it was fixed, first of all.
Well, I don't know. At this point, Trump almost won.
Right. Well, I think but that's also kind of like the problem with the what I call gang mentality. I,
Mm.
I we haven't had anyone to check us on those thoughts and all that. I have people like come to my office and I'll talk about politics, I'll talk about religion, I'll talk about abortion, I'll talk about anything anyone wants to talk about. And one of the things that I've kind of like used as a platform in that particular setting is that we may not agree exactly on things. That doesn't mean you're a bad person or I'm a bad person. It just means we disagree. I think that with a lot of particularly since the pandemic, but it's happened before that, it's become, well, if you don't agree with me, you're against me. And I don't know when we turn into the Bloods versus the Crips in general, but that's kind of what it is nowadays.
In the 80s.
Nothing against the Bloods or the Crips. I know a few, but don't come and get me. Just saying.
Clearly, you're dressed in red.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm videoing this.
And clearly,
I have a gray shirt over there. I'll wear that for our next interview.
Why is this planned? Everyone watching us from prison, please disregard the colors of my company. Oops.
Yeah. But I think it really is though. Like on the political side, I hear stuff like that and it just bothers me because you can have a different view of XYZ. My respect for you will not change. I tell people, unless you're telling me that it's great to throw kittens off an overpass, I think I might change my opinion then. But the rest of it are just points of views. And I think that when you decide that you can decide not to be moved, but you can still respect someone for having their own opinion and not push it on them. And I think that that's the other unchecked thoughts that have occurred.
Ooh, I mean, that's a big one, especially around religion. Like, do whatever religion you feel like doing, as long as I don't have to hear about it. It's like I don't need to constantly be told,
right,
or expect to adhere to it either. But then at the same time, when it comes to stuff about race and stuff like that, I've been kind of changing my narrative a little bit about like, I actually can't disagree with you on this because it completely whitewashes and throws away and dismisses or disregards or oppresses really
right,
entire group of people because of a hateful thought that definitely went unchecked. And so just like at that point, I'm like, no, we're definitely going to have a problem now. Seeing as how your opinion is about you being better than others.
right.
And that's not fair. If your opinion is based on somebody else's oppression, I don't want to hear it. Frankly.
And to me, I think that you're absolutely right. I need like you've kind of like pointed out my flaw in my thought process. You're right. There's things I don't put up with.
You especially. I think that's why I liked it from the beginning. That it was like, oh, clearly he has the experience.
Well,
knowing exactly how this works. Yeah.
I will never pretend I went through anything that someone of color or different nationalities that are not necessarily very well invited to America. But being a French speaker, first and foremost, when I moved here, I got the treatment of the first week I was here. I stopped for directions. This is way before GPS times. And someone looked at my plate and heard my accent and say, instead of giving me directions, so why don't you just go back to where you're from? And I will not pretend, please, anyone who's listening to this, don't take it out of context. I am not comparing myself to, I'm a white male. I come with a privilege that I know about. But that's why when I hear the stuff that you're talking about and based on race, based on gender, based on non-binary, and again, not that I don't care, but for me, that's the stuff that you can be whatever you want. I'm okay with that. I don't know all the terms.
You don't hate me because of it.
I won't. No, like I said, kittens over an overpass. That's kind of my line, so to speak. But knowing that and feeling that, and I think we've gotten more entrenched with some people in regards to that. And like there's times where I would hear things like, "Oh, Steve, well, you're not a real immigrant. You're from Canada," and I'm like, "Okay, thanks. Just my whole culture you just dismissed. Thank you. I appreciate that."
A whole language, a whole style of food, a whole country, massive, huge, with its own rituals and traditions.
And Quebecers being Quebecers and oppressed in their own way for several years by the English in 1800s and 1900s. I mean, again, nothing to compare myself to anyone, a person of color, because that to me is so different, but it's similar.
But you see where it's intersectionally like similar. Like, okay, yeah, it depends. You got hatred that day for where you were from. You could get hatred tomorrow for a totally different reason because maybe you're disabled or maybe you just so happen to be a woman.
And you get it sometimes for like, for me, it's also happened when I'm a staunch feminist. I'm a staunch equalitarian on everything, name it. But you also get hate for that. For me, it's just not, I will never treat a woman differently than I treat a man. The same respect, the same everything. And for some people, like, oh, so you're soft because you're a therapist? How about you?
I know they make different therapists different ways because we're not earthy, crunchy granola over here.
Well, I think that someone mentioned one day, said, there's this, and I can't remember the words they used, but I liked it. I think that me and you fall in that category. We're kind of like that new, truthful, personable therapists. We are not a blank slate. We're not.
Yeah.
I'm not going to wear like, my earthy, crunchy stuff, and I'm not eating granola bars all the time.
Yeah. My office is not going to say live, laugh, love. It will never. Actually, it's not allowed.
Well, in my office, there's two signs that people tend to really like. One of them is maybe swearing will help. And swears, question mark. I call them sentence enhancers.
Wow. Well, the best one I've ever seen in one of the therapist offices at Aon was actually before she was working at Aon, and I had met her working in a community health center. And I walk into her office. I'm brand new. She's going to train me that day. And all of a sudden, I look into her wall and I see this teeny tiny little frame in a massive wall.
Right.
So, of course, it has my attention. And when I walk up to it, what it says is, haters going to hate.
Right.
Wow. The knowledge imparted upon me in that moment. I was like, that's the deepest thing I've ever seen. And it is actually true.
Right.
It turns out, yeah, I am happy that I got to meet you before the pandemic, that you were there throughout the pandemic, that you got your podcast going, because it's been helpful for me to hear other practitioners, see how they pivot their businesses, how they go about their businesses, what their opinions are, what they're allowed to say, what they're not allowed to say.
Right.
Because there was a point there where people were like, you're a therapist. You can't give your opinion on this. How come? I am a therapist. I literally can.
Right.
Good.
Well, I'm not a blank slate anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
And just to kind of like complete for this episode, I was wondering how, you handled the whole people wanting to be seen face to face versus online, because I feel that right now, part of the other important part, I respect people who just want to stay online. They can make their decisions in their lives. I'm not judging them. It's up to them. But how did you handle people who might have been wanting to be seen face to face, especially at the beginning? And where are you at now in regards to all that with your practice?
Well, we are seeing folks face to face. It's a lot of the longtime clients, a lot of families, a lot of people with little kids, where it's like significant, like exponentially harder to do telehealth with littler ones. It really goes by the therapist's choice if they feel comfortable seeing people in person. Some therapists come to the office and work from the office because they feel more comfortable and they need that working space. But I did not struggle to tell people before there was even a vaccine not to come to the office, because people sent me threatening messages. Well, we will refuse to do therapy. You can refuse to do therapy wherever you want. There's a wait list everywhere.
Right.
So you could go either on my wait list or someone else's. That's fine with me. It's just that can't tell you when we're going to be back online, because I have therapists who see people in person, and then I have the majority of therapists who don't. We've also had a bunch of therapists step up during the pandemic and say, hey, this would be really good for my career. I can do it from far away, or I've moved abroad. We have therapists now who are living in Mexico, who go to Puerto Rico, for example, like me, all the time. And because your license is here, you can continue to practice here wherever you are licensed, because we have therapists with multiple
licenses.
states licenses. They have found this financial freedom and this kind of like career independence that they've never had before, because it's always got to be about punching in and getting there and doing your timesheets. And it's just like, no, we have better ways of handling this now. And even as a business, I changed what my overhead costs were, what I'm going to invest in, what I want to change for the therapist, how I keep the therapy, like the milieu open for the people who do want to come in, who are interested in that. We really are not offering a lot of new slots in person anymore. It's really case by case and depending on therapist availability, because I'm also not going to burn out our first frontline, which happened in 2020 real fast, within months. For the very first time in my company's career, we had no space for anyone. And I was hiring people as fast as I possibly can.
Right.
And so it was just like, either we go with the flow or it's back to the wait list, y'all. Like at this point, we were getting overflows from MGH because of the language capacity. We started to get calls about that. It was, again, in the chaos that I feel familiar with.
Right. I was going to say that, but you took the words out of my mouth.
Thriving in the chaos. All of that, because of my wonderful team, we were able to get it together and provide as much as we could, because when people couldn't go to emergency rooms for mental health emergencies and they were being turned away for COVID-related reasons, which made perfect sense to me, like, yeah, maybe that's not where we should be right now, but you're actively floridly psychotic. You know, it was trying to triage all of that as to the best of our abilities as fast as we possibly could. And I have to say, everyone on the team that has been with us since the beginning of the pandemic has been on top of it. Like really proud of their work, and carrying their weight and making sure that they're taken care of became my job.
Right.
And not just showering them with gifts and pizza parties. No, like actually being there for support, trying to connect with them as often as I possibly could. The office culture changed entirely. We don't have staff meetings.
Right. Is that the future of therapy for us, especially after a pandemic?
It might be a big chunk of it. It might become a big chunk of it, because just in timing alone, I can be seen by my therapist at 1 p.m. and by 2 p.m. have lunch ready for everyone. And look at God, I didn't have to travel for half an hour this way, half an hour the other way. I don't have to pay for parking. I don't have to do so many of the other things that for people who had accessibility issues before, maybe that was a problem.
Right. Right.
You know, so it depends. I think it's going to stay kind of hybrid. I like having a therapist that I can see in the office when I feel like it. And I also like having the option of being able to just call her and be like, listen, I need your support right now.
Right. And I think that that's one of the things that I've been asked, because they're like, well, you were already ahead of the curve about telehealth. And I've been asked for people I trust, and they said, what's the future of therapy, Steve? The future of therapy is hybrid, and we need to embrace it. Some people will only do well face to face, and that's a fact. That's not an argument. This is not like they're being difficult and nothing else. And some people do so much better on telehealth, and that's a fact, and it's not something we can argue. And texting, even though, as I vaguely said, I worked for a company that did texting, and I don't mention names. I don't think they're doing it right. That's why I don't mention names.
Yeah.
But I think there's ways of doing text therapy that's going to be very beneficial in the future. And I think that we can't dismiss, and it's going to be hopefully not dismissed, but they're starting to think about no more telephone therapy. And I I think that's a mistake because I've had people have immense breakthroughs because the eye-to-eye contact from a video or from face-to-face is too much for them.
Mm-hmm.
So by doing it on the phone, they're just opening up. So I think that for me, when we think about the future of therapy and what the pandemic has brought us, is that we now understand a lot more the clinical aspect of all approaches and stop telling people, and I'm exaggerating, lie on the couch, look away from me. I'm going to sit at the head of the couch and you're going to tell me stuff, or everything's got to be, touchy feely. It's going to be a hybrid. And I think that if we don't embrace the hybrid, and I think that, thank you, pandemic, I can't believe I'm saying that, but I'm going to say it anyway. Thanks to the pandemic, I think we've realized that the work that we can do that can be very successful has to be delivered in the way that's received by the client the best.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
well,
we got to over 400 clients per week during our like peak time in 2020. We were servicing about 400 people per week. It was something like out of control. And the thing is that people felt like they even needed multiple appointments per week. I mean, everybody was struggling for one reason or the other, including the therapist, and they pushed through, and they taught me even skills to regulate in the process. Like we were there for each other. It was crazy.
we need to be able to be there for therapists. And for me, the change in the office is also as well. Productivity cannot be your first motivator. You got to remember that I want all businesses to understand mental health and understand trauma informed. But I think that in our particular business, we have to start realizing that therapists are humans, and a 80%, 70% obligation of what's it called, productivity rate. That's taking no account into a human's loss, a human's struggles, or
Rhythm, a
we can't.
human rhythm.
So, well, obviously you're coming back. We already know that, but just because, in case people catch the first, they don't catch the second, where can people reach you, Jenn?
You can always reach me by sending me an email to getaonhelp. That's GETAEONHELP at gmail.com. And follow us on social media. It's at Aon Counseling on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn.
Well, I'm going to put that in the show notes, obviously, but thank you. I can't wait to get our second interview done because I think we're going to have a whole lot to say about that. But thank you so much, Jenn.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for being my teacher.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, this concludes episode 47 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. Jenn Nakhai will be back next episode, so I hope you join us then. Please like, subscribe, or follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for information, educational, and entertainment purposes. If you are struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor or therapist for consultation.